I want you to take a second and think about your driver's license
Yeah.
or your passport. You carry that around, and you think of it as a document that proves who you are,
Yeah.
right? It's your identity.
Sure. Name, date of birth, photo.
Exactly. But imagine for a moment that this document didn't just have that stuff. Imagine if it had a stamp on it, a big red permanent stamp that just said thief.
And not because you'd actually stolen anything.
Right. Not because you were caught shoplifting or, embezzled money from your job, but simply because your grandfather was a thief, or because your last name happens to be Smith and the government has just decided that, well, all Smiths are criminals.
It sounds like the premise of a dystopian novel, doesn't it? Like a sort of caste-based version of Minority Report where the crime is predicted before it even happens and it's based entirely on your bloodline.
That's it, exactly. But this isn't science fiction. We're talking about a very real, very specific piece of legislation from colonial India, the Criminal Tribes Act of 1871. I've been reading through this stack of documents you sent over. And, the act itself, the police memos, these private letters between British officials, and shocking feels like a complete understatement. We're talking about a law that essentially codified the idea that you can be a criminal by birth.
It represents a really profound shift in legal philosophy and frankly, a huge departure from the British common law tradition that the colonial administration claimed it was upholding.
How so?
Usually, law creates a boundary, a boundary between the innocent and the guilty based on action. You steal, you become a thief in the eyes of the law. You commit murder, you become a murderer. This act completely erased that boundary.
So it's not about what you did.
Not at all. It created a category of people who were legally criminal by their very nature. Their existence itself became a police matter.
So today, that's what we're doing. We're doing a deep dive into the Criminal Tribes Act, or the CTA. And we aren't just, skimming the surface here. We have the primary source documents.
Right. We have the text of the act itself, which is dense, but it's incredibly revealing when you break it down.
And we've got these internal memos that are just surprisingly candid about how the sausage was made, so to speak. And these police reports that read like, field guides to wildlife, but for people.
And some really intense correspondence from judges who were actually fighting against this law. That's one of the most revealing parts of this whole stack, I think.
That there was a fight.
A huge one. It wasn't a unanimous decision by some monolith called the British Empire. There's this fierce tug of war between the police administration, who wanted absolute control, and the judiciary, who looked at this bill and essentially said, this is going to turn India into a police state.
Okay, so let's unpack all of this. We need to set the scene first. It's
Yeah.
1871. The British Raj is fully established. The 1857 rebellion, the Sepoy Mutiny, it's in the rearview mirror. But the British are still very, very nervous about control. What's the mindset here? Why did they feel the need to criminalize entire communities?
Well, to understand the failure of the CTA, you have to look at what the British considered their greatest previous success. For decades before this, the administration had been obsessed with suppressing the Thuggee cults.
The thugs. And this is where we literally get the English word thug, right?
Exactly. These were organized groups, fraternities really, of ritual stranglers and robbers who operated on the highways of India.
It sounds like something out of a horror movie.
It was terrifying. They would befriend travelers, sometimes travel with them for days, gain their trust, and then, at a prearranged signal, they'd strangle them with a handkerchief, a rumal, and bury the bodies right there on the road. It was organized, it was secretive, and the British created a special department, the Thuggee and Dacoity Department, just to hunt them down.
And they considered that whole campaign a win.
A massive win, a triumph of British administration. They used a system of approvers.
Approvers, is that like a state's witness or an informant?
Essentially, yes. They would capture a thug, and instead of hanging him immediately, they would offer him his life if he testified against his Confederates, his whole gang. They built these massive, intricate genealogy trees of crime, mapping out entire families. And by the 1860s, they really felt they had solved the Thuggee problem.
So they were riding high on this victory, feeling pretty confident.
Correct. And that hubris is absolutely key to understanding the CTA. We see it in the notes from F.O. Maine. He was the Inspector General of Police for the Northwestern Provinces, a really key figure.
But what's he saying in these memos?
He basically says, look, we beat the thugs, we crushed them, but now we have all these other wandering groups, the Sansias, the Beauregards, the Banjaras, and they're just as bad. We need the same tools, the same heavy-handed tactics to crush them too.
But were they just as bad? Were wandering traders really the same as ritual murderers? Or was this just a profound cultural misunderstanding?
And that is the absolute crux of it. The administration was dealing with a mogul population. India has always had peripatetic groups, traders, wandering performers, pastoralists who move their cattle with the seasons. It's a huge part of the subcontinent's social fabric.
Or not for the British.
Not at all. To the settled Victorian British mind, wandering equaled vagrant, and vagrant equaled criminal. They couldn't understand people who didn't have a fixed address, a piece of land they were tied to. They viewed a lack of fixed residence as a lack of morality. It was inherently suspicious.
And out of that suspicion, they developed this whole sociological theory that crime in India was a profession. I found this fascinating. Just like you might be born into a family of carpenters or blacksmiths and learn the trade from your father, they believed these tribes were born into the trade of theft.
That is the core premise. The correspondence we have from Mr. Strachey and Mr. Main argues exactly that. That for these groups, crime isn't a moral failing or, an act of desperation. It's a hereditary calling, a caste duty almost.
Maine uses this one phrase in his memo. It really stuck with me. He says they are addicted to the systematic commission of non-bailable offenses.
Addicted. Yes.
Addicted to the systematic commission. That is such heavy loaded language. It implies they can't help themselves. It's medicalizing crime.
It absolutely is. And if you believe someone is biologically or culturally addicted to crime, then rehabilitation isn't really your goal, is it?
No, containment is.
Containment, exactly. You don't cure them, you just lock them down.
So, okay, let's get into the act itself. This is the legal architecture of that containment. I'm looking at Part 1, Section 2, the part about criminal tribes. How do they actually, on paper, define who is a criminal tribe?
The power it gave the government was just sweeping. Section 2 states that if the local government has reason to believe that any tribe, gang, or class of persons is addicted to the systematic commission of non-bailable offenses, they can report it to the Governor General and Council.
Just reason to believe. That's a pretty low bar, isn't it? It's not proof, it's not evidence. It's a feeling.
It's a suspicion. And once the Governor General signs off on that suspicion, that group is officially notified. And this is the moment where the legal trap just snaps shut.
Why? Can't they appeal? Can't they go to a judge and say, hey, wait a minute, we aren't criminals?
No, absolutely not. Section 6 is terrifyingly clear on this. I can read it for you. It says, no court of justice shall question the validity of any such notification.
Wow. So the executive branch decides you're a criminal tribe, and the judicial branch is explicitly forbidden from asking why.
Precisely. It's a complete circumvention of due process.
Huh.
So if you are a member of a notified tribe, let's say the Burwars, who we'll talk about later, and you are brought before a judge for any reason, you cannot argue, I am not a criminal. The law has already decided that your entire group is criminal. The burden of proof just shifts entirely.
You're guilty by association, by birth.
Exactly. So the court assumes your criminality from the outset. But it didn't just stop at labeling them. The act built a surveillance state around these communities that would make modern authoritarian regimes blush. We really need to talk about the register.
Yes, the registration system. It's outlined in Section 7 and onwards.
The magistrate of the district was ordered to make a register of all the members of these notified tribes, every man, woman, and child. And if your name was on that list, your life was no longer your own. You were subject to constant, intense monitoring.
And the sources mention the roll call. This feels incredibly intrusive. Can you walk us through what that would have actually looked like for a person living under this act?
Okay, so imagine this. You're a member of a notified tribe. You live in a designated village. Under the rules made pursuant to the act, you often had to appear for a roll call at the local police station or before the village headman, and not once a week. Sometimes every single night.
Every single night.
Sometimes every night, sometimes even more often. If there was a recent theft in the area or any kind of suspicion, imagine the psychological toll of that. You can't go to sleep until you've lined up with your whole family to prove you haven't run away. You have to prove you are physically present every single day of your life.
And what if you aren't? I mean, what if you miss a roll call?
The penalties were severe. Section 19 lays it out. Violating the rules like missing roll call or being found outside your designated area could get you 6 months of rigorous imprisonment for a first offense.
Let's pause there for a second. We see that term a lot in these colonial documents. Rigorous imprisonment. Is that just a fancy old-timey way of saying jail?
No, not at all. It's a very specific legal distinction. Simple imprisonment just meant confinement. You sat in a cell. Rigorous imprisonment meant hard labor.
So what kind of labor are we talking about?
We're talking about breaking rocks, grinding corn by hand for hours, road building, often in chains. It was physically exhausting, punitive punishment.
So if you miss a single roll call because you were, I don't know, sick or you were working in a field too far away and you lost track of time, you essentially get sentenced to a chain gang for 6 months.
For a first offense, yes. For a second offense, it goes up to 1 year.
Or whipping.
Whipping. It's right there, explicit in the text. Whipping to be inflicted in the manner prescribed by any law. It's just brutal.
It is. The British administration believed that physical pain was a necessary and effective deterrent for what they viewed as hardened populations who didn't respond to fines or simple jailing.
And the restrictions just get tighter and tighter. Let's talk about the ticket of leave system. It's in Section 20.
Right, the pass system. This is another layer of control. No registered person could leave the prescribed limits of their village without a written pass from the police.
This feels like house arrest for an entire community. You're literally trapped in your village. It essentially was. And the pass wasn't just a general permission slip. It had to specify everything. The place of destination, the exact duration of your absence, and crucially, the precise route you were to take to get there.
The route. So I take a shortcut through the woods.
You are in violation of that act. If you were found even 100 yards off that prescribed route, or if your time expired by an hour, you could be arrested without a warrant by any police officer or even any village watchman who found you.
This must have absolutely destroyed their livelihoods. I mean, we mentioned the Banjars earlier. These were trading tribes. Their whole economy was based on moving goods from one part of India to another on their bullock caravans.
It was devastating. The sources explicitly mention the Banjars as a problem group. The British categorized them as cattle lifters and kidnappers, but they acknowledge in the very same documents that their nominal profession was trading in cattle and grain.
They knew what they were doing.
They knew. By fixing them to a specific village, you kill their trade overnight. You force this proud mobile community into a sedentary lifestyle they aren't equipped for, often on land that is barely arable, and then you act surprised when they turn to crime to survive.
And the surveillance wasn't even just done by the police. The act weaponized the village structure itself. Yeah, I'm looking at Section 21 here.
That's a key point. It's a really insidious part of the law. The British didn't have enough white officers to watch every single village in the vast Indian interior. So Section 21 placed the duty, the legal responsibility on the village headmen, the zamindars, and the watchmen, the chowkidars.
Can we define those terms quickly? A zamindar is a landowner, a local big shot, right?
Yes, typically the zamindar is the hereditary landowner or the main revenue collector for the village, a person of significant local power. The chowkidar is the local village watchman, kind of a low-level constable.
So what did the act make them do?
It said this: if a registered member of a criminal tribe goes missing or leaves without a pass, and the zamindar or chowkidar doesn't report it immediately to the police, then the zamindar himself is liable for punishment.
So they turned the neighbors into jailers. They turned the local landlord into a warden for the state.
Exactly. It created this web of local accountability that pitted the settled village hierarchy against these specialized, often nomadic groups. But here is where it gets really interesting or, cynical. The sources themselves suggest this system was corrupt from day one.
Oh, this is the concept of paying E. I saw this word popping up in the police reports. It sounds like some kind of fee.
It was essentially a bribe or a protection fee. The police reports, the ones written by the British officers, admit that the zamindars often colluded with the very tribes they were supposed to be watching.
How'd that work?
The thieves would go out on a raid, steal some goods, and then they would give a cut of the loot, the fani, to the zamindar. In exchange, the zamindar would look the other way.
So the zamindar marks them present at the nightly roll call, even if they're 100 miles away raiding a market town.
Exactly that. Or hides them when the district police come looking for suspects. So the very people who were supposed to enforce the act, the zamindars, became the fences for the stolen goods. They had a financial incentive to let the crime continue.
It's a classic protection racket. And it was sanctioned, or at least facilitated, by the state's own laws. The act didn't stop crime. In some ways, it just organized it under the patronage of the village elite.
That's the deep irony of it. By trying to crush these criminal tribes, they simply integrated them more deeply into the corrupt underbelly of the local village administration.
That is just wild. It's a total systemic failure of its own intended purpose. But before we move on to the internal debate about all this, we have to look at part 2 of the act. I have to admit, as I was reading through this, I hit part 2 and I had to stop and reread the header. It felt like I had just jumped into a completely different book, a different law.
You mean the unit clauses?
Yes. We go from talking about cattle thieves and highway robbery to suddenly, out of nowhere, legislating gender and sexuality. Part 2 of the Act specifically targets eunuchs, and the definition they use is, well, it's brutally explicit.
It is. Section 24 defines a eunuch as, and I'm quoting, all persons of the male sex who admit themselves or on medical inspection clearly appear to be impotent.
Medical inspection. That implies an incredibly invasive, humiliating state procedure. I mean, we are literally talking about police doctors physically examining people's genitals to determine their legal status and put them on a register.
Yeah.
Why? Why on earth is this in a bill about highway robbers?
It's a question historians have debated a lot, but the official British stance, as you can see in the correspondence, was twofold. First, they claimed they were trying to stop the kidnapping and castration of young boys. They had this belief that the Hijra community replenished its numbers by kidnapping children.
Okay, so that was the official reason.
That was one reason. The other was to curb what they called unnatural offenses, which was the Victorian legal code for sodomy. They saw the Hijra community as a source of moral corruption.
But when you look at the actual restrictions in the Act, it goes way, way beyond just preventing kidnapping. It looks like a deliberate attempt to erase them from public life entirely.
It absolutely was social erasure. It was an attack on their very existence. Look at Section 26. It became a punishable offense for a registered eunuch to appear dressed in female clothes in a public place,
Okay,
or to dance or play music in public for hire.
but that's their entire livelihood. The Hijra community in India traditionally earns a living through blessings, dancing, and performing a ritual called badhai at births and weddings. The British just made their entire culture illegal.
And not just their culture, their civil rights. Section 29 creates what lawyers call civil death.
Civil death. That sounds incredibly ominous. What does that mean in actual practice?
It means you are alive, but you are dead in the eyes of the law regarding your capacity to act in society. A registered eunuch was declared legally incapable of acting as a guardian to any minor. They were incapable of making a gift or a will.
Wait, hold on. They couldn't pass on property. If they owned a house, they couldn't leave it to someone.
No. They were completely stripped of their property rights. If they died, the state would likely seize their assets because they legally couldn't bequeath them. And they were declared incapable of adopting a son, which was a crucial way of creating lineage and family. The British were trying to starve the community out of existence by cutting off both their economic lifeline and their ability to form families or pass down wealth.
And the cruelty of Section 28 is just,
Yeah.
it's hard to read.
That's the one that gives the state power over children. It says any boy under the age of 16 found in the house of a registered eunuch could be taken away by the magistrate. Just taken. The eunuch could be imprisoned, and the boy would be sent back to his parents, or if they couldn't be found, the state would essentially take custody of him.
So it empowered the police to raid homes and tear families apart based purely on the suspicion that the child shouldn't be there, even if the child was there voluntarily or was a relative or an apprentice or just had nowhere else to go.
Correct. It was a targeted attempt at, frankly, cultural genocide, tucked inside a bill about cattle thieves. It shows how the colonial state viewed non-conforming gender identities as a source of fundamental disorder, just like the wandering tribes. They were things to be categorized, controlled, and eventually, they hoped, eliminated.
It's an incredibly heavy stuff. But what's so fascinating in these documents is that not every British official was on board with this. We usually have this image of the colonial administration as this monolith, all these men with stiff upper lips all agreeing on how to run the empire. But there was a serious pitched battle happening behind the scenes over this act.
A massive fight. And this brings us to part 3 of our dive, the great internal debate. On one side, you have the executive, the administration, men like F.O. Main, the Inspector General of Police, and a senior official named Mr. Strecky. They are the law and order hawks.
I'm reading this memo from F.O. Main, dated May 28, 1867, and the tone is, well, startlingly aggressive. He keeps talking about the Indian Penal Code, the standard laws against theft and assault, as if they're completely useless. Why was he so frustrated with the normal legal process?
Because the normal law required evidence. It required due process. Maine was a results man. He was a policeman, not a lawyer. He basically argues that these tribes are secret societies, like the mafia. If you wait for them to commit a crime and then try to find a witness who will testify in open court, you've already lost. No one will talk.
So he wanted a shortcut to conviction.
He wanted more than a shortcut. Look at paragraph 4 of his memo. What's the specific word he uses there? It's a very telling choice.
Let me see. A system of espionage. He wants a system of espionage against his own subjects.
That was his solution. He argued that you can't police these people with constables on the beat. You have to infiltrate them, spy on them, and control them preemptively. He argued that because these tribes are close-knit, secretive societies, normal policing is doomed to fail. You can't get witnesses. So he wants the power to arrest them just for being who they are.
And he cites the Habitual Criminals Act back in England as a precedent for this.
He
Right?
does. He tries to make it sound like this is just an extension of British law. But the judges weren't buying that comparison, were they?
No, they weren't.
Yeah.
And this is where the pushback comes in, from the other side of the debate. You have these figures, Justice Turner and Justice Spanky of the High Court of the Northwestern Provinces. And they fought this thing tooth and nail.
They did. And they immediately pointed out a critical fundamental distinction. In England, to be declared a habitual criminal under the law, you actually had to be convicted of a crime first, usually multiple crimes.
Right. It seems obvious.
Yeah.
You have to prove I'm a thief before you can legally treat me like a habitual thief.
Exactly. But this Indian Act made you a criminal without a prior conviction, just by virtue of your birth. And Justice Turner called it out directly. He warned in his official response about police suppression.
Police oppression. That's a very strong phrase coming from a sitting high court judge in the colonial system.
He knew the reality on the ground. The judges knew that the Indian police force was, for the most part, poorly paid, poorly trained, and notoriously prone to corruption and brutality. They argued that if you gave this police force unchecked power to arrest anyone without a warrant, it would inevitably lead to massive extortion. They warned that the police would terrorize innocent people to extract bribes.
And as we saw with the whole Thangi system you described, they were absolutely right. Their fears were completely founded.
They were, and it wasn't just a practical objection. There was a deep philosophical objection, too. The judges argued it was, and I'm quoting here, opposed to the present system of punishment, to punish a man for his status rather than for his actions. It violated the core principles of their own legal tradition.
They also worried about the settlements.
Yes. They had this incredible foresight. They feared that by concentrating all these so-called criminals into settlements, cutting off their traditional livelihoods, and giving them no other way to survive, the government would just be creating manufactories of crime.
I mean, factories of crime. That's such a powerful, evocative phrase. If you take a group of people, you label them thieves, you forbid them from working honestly, what else are they going to do but steal to feed their families?
Exactly. It becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. But in the end, as is so often the case, the executive steamrolled the judiciary. The Governor General and Council, the highest authority, decided that the administrative need for safety of the community and control outweighed the judicial concern for individual rights and legal niceties.
So the law and order guys won.
They won. They essentially suspended habeas corpus, the fundamental right to not be held without charge, for these specific tasks and communities.
So the law passes. And now the British have to actually implement it. They have to decide who exactly is a criminal. And this brings us to what I think is the most bizarrely fascinating part of the entire source material, the ethnographic profiling.
This is the science of stereotyping. The Victorian British had an obsession with categorizing everything, plants, animals, and people. They produced these incredibly detailed reports on the modus operandi of each tribe. It's like they were studying bird species, but these were human beings. They broke down their social structures, their religious habits, their omens, and even their secret slang.
Okay, so let's get into it. Case study number 1, the Boer Wars. The source material is completely obsessed with them. How did the British police reports describe the Boer Wars?
The report describes the Boer Wars as scientific thieves. It's a term of grudging respect, almost. They make a very clear distinction. Boer Wars steal, but they do not rob. They are nonviolent. They rely on stealth, misdirection, and trickery, not force.
And the level of detail is just incredible. They describe the gang structure. At the top, you have the Siwa.
Yes, the Sewa is the leader of the gang. But interestingly, the sources say the Sewa often stays at home or in the camp. He doesn't always go out on the actual raid. He's the planner, the financier, the one who fences the goods, and he receives the biggest share of the loot.
So he's like the CEO of the operation, the guy in the boardroom.
Essentially, but the role that really caught my eye in these police reports, the one that shows the level of organization, was the Deeper.
The Deepra. What was that? It sounds like a specific rank.
It is, and it shows how corporate this whole structure was. The Deber wasn't a frontline thief who went into the shop. He was essentially the quartermaster and the logistics guy. He did the cooking for the gang while they were on a mission, he managed the camp, and crucially, he acted as the spy and the watchman. But look at the pay structure the British uncovered for this role.
I'm looking at the appendix here.
Mm-hmm.
Wait a minute, he gets a salary. A fixed salary.
Exactly. He didn't just get a share of the loot like the other thieves. He got a base salary. The report says 3 rupees a month, plus a specific smaller percentage of the take.
That changes the whole picture. That's not a chaotic gang of vagrants. That's a business with a payroll.
It is, and you can feel the British struggling with this. They wanted to see savages, but what they found was a bureaucracy that, in some ways, mirrored their own corporate structures.
And the disguises. The report says they dress as Brahmins, as soldiers, or as respectable merchants to scout their targets.
And this terrified the British. The idea that a criminal could look just like a respectable person was deeply unsettling to their social order. The report details how a group of Boers would enter a shop, pose as wealthy customers to distract the shopkeeper, and use incredible sleight of hand to steal jewels or cash. They call it scientific because of the precision and the planning involved.
And they had their own system of superstitions and omens. The sources actually list them out. If a jackal howls on the left.
It's a good omen. The raid will be successful. Proceed with the mission.
But if a donkey brays.
Yeah. A very bad omen. Abort the mission immediately and go home. They also worshipped a specific deity, Swaraj or Devi, and they would dedicate a set percentage of their loot to the local temple. For the British, this just reinforced their idea that crime wasn't just a job for them, it was their religion.
The language part absolutely blew my mind. The appendix to the police report actually lists out their secret slang, like a dictionary.
Yes, the Ramesses or the secret dialects. The British were obsessed with this. They believed if they could crack the language, they could crack the tribe. For the Boer Wars, they list words like lootlo for to plunder.
And fortuna, what does that mean?
Farhuna was the specific term for the ceremony of meeting before a raid. It was a ritual gathering to plan and seek good omens.
And then there's a word, Nultra One, who gives up thieving. The fact that leaving the life was a concept significant enough to have its own specific word is really telling.
It is. And the signals. Tapping your fingers on your cheek in a certain way to signal danger. Or waving a cloth in a specific pattern to tell your comrades to flee. The British cataloged all of this. They distributed these glossaries to their police officers so they could listen in on conversations in the marketplace and try to identify them.
So how do you contrast that with another group they profiled, the Sonorayas?
Right. The Sonorayas were profiled very differently. The reports emphasized they are daytime thieves. They weren't burglars, they were pickpockets and cut purses. And unlike the more localized Boer Wars, the Sonorayas were noted to be dispersed all over India, Calcutta, Bombay, Madras. They would travel for the thieving season and then return home to the northwestern provinces during the rainy season to lie low.
And they claimed to be Brahmins, the highest caste.
They did. The British reports are very dismissive of this, of course. They go into this long, detailed analysis of their caste genealogy to prove they are actually imposters, descended from a washerwoman, not Brahmins. But the Sonorayas clearly use that high caste appearance to their advantage. If you look like a priest, people in a crowded festival don't guard their wallets as closely when you brush past them.
It's just fascinating how the British saw this act of wandering as the root of all evil. And this brings us back again to the Banjaras.
The Banjara problem was particularly complex for the British because they were, for centuries, the transport and logistics backbone of pre-colonial India. They moved grain and salt on these massive caravans of thousands of bullocks. But this is the 1870s. What else is happening in India at this exact time?
The railways are being built.
Exactly. The British are building a massive railway network, and the trains are faster, cheaper, and more reliable than bullock caravans. The railways are killing the Banjara trade. So you have an entire community losing its economic purpose right at the moment the state decides their mobile lifestyle is criminal. The act forced these proud, mobile people into what were essentially open-air prisons, just as their traditional livelihood was collapsing around them.
Which leads us directly to the implications of all this. We have the law, we have the profiles. What was the reality of enforcement on the ground?
The reality was a vicious cycle of poverty and recidivism. The act mentions the creation of reformatory settlements. The official idea was to take these tribes, settle them on land, and turn them into honest farmers.
A noble goal on paper, I guess. Did it work?
Rarely, if ever. The land they were given was often the worst quality alkaline soil that couldn't grow crops, wasteland no one else wanted. They had no background in agriculture, their skills were in trade or performance, and because they were branded criminal tribes, no settled villager would hire them for honest work. The pass system meant they couldn't travel to find work elsewhere.
So the manufactories of crime prophecy that Justice Turner warned about, it came true.
It came true. The settlements became holding pens where crime was often the only viable way to survive. The British created the very problem they claimed they were solving.
And the most heartbreaking part of all this has to be the children. The psychological impact of being told from the moment you were born that you are a born criminal.
The sources touch on this concept of apprenticeship. The British officials used it as a justification. They viewed the children as future criminals who needed to be saved from their parents. This idea, saving the child, was the rationale used to separate families.
But what was the reality for a child in the tribe?
Well, the sources describe boys being apprenticed to the trade of thieving by age 10. The British solution was to remove them and put them in industrial schools. But for the child who remained in the tribe, they grew up in a world where their parents had to report for a nightly roll call, where they saw their fathers get whipped for missing it, and where survival depended on outsmarting the police. It reinforced the us versus them mentality.
It would have to. It solidified the very identity the British were trying to erase. Instead of assimilating them, it just hardened the distinction between them and the rest of society.
Absolutely. It created a permanent, legally defined underclass.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, we have to look at the legacy. The Criminal Tribes Act was eventually repealed after India gained independence, right?
It was, yes. It was repealed in 1952. The new government of independent India immediately recognized it as a draconian, unjust colonial relic. These tribes were officially denotified.
But the stigma didn't just vanish overnight when the law was changed.
No, not at all. Today, these communities are known as denotified tribes, or DNTs. But the Palita manuals in many Indian states to this day still contain the old colonial stereotypes. The language is sometimes lifted directly from these 1871 reports. The stigma of being a criminal caste haunts these communities. They still face massive discrimination and police harassment, largely based on these profiles written a century and a half ago.
And the eunuch community, the Hijras, they are still one of the most marginalized groups in India. This act was a major part of what pushed them to the absolute margins in the first place.
It codified their exclusion. The legal battles for their rights that are happening now are, in many ways, still trying to undo the specific damage of that legislation.
It really leaves you with a heavy final thought, doesn't it?
Yeah.
We look back at this 1871 act and we think, how barbaric. How could they profile people based on birth? Thank God we don't do that anymore.
What do we? Or do we just do it differently?
Exactly. That's the question that lingers. In our modern age, we have things like algorithmic policing. We have predictive crime data that tells police where to patrol. We have AI systems determining who is a high risk for a loan default or for reoffending after prison.
We've replaced the hereditary tag with a series of data points, but the underlying logic is uncomfortably similar, isn't it? If an algorithm says you are more likely to commit a crime because of your zip code, your family's financial history, your social media contacts, and your background, aren't we just reinventing the Criminal Tribes Act with a veneer of objective technology?
Have we truly moved past the logic of the CTA, or have we just found new, cleaner, more scientific-sounding ways to say, you look like a criminal? That's something to really think about.
Indeed, it forces us to question how much we still judge people by who they appear to be, rather than by what they've actually done.
Thank you for listening to this deep dive into the Criminal Tribes Act of 1871. It's a very dark chapter of history, but one we really need to understand.
Because knowledge is the only way to make sure we don't repeat its logic.
We'll see you in the next deep dive.